Hey, everybody, welcome to the show.
Hello. We're going to be talking about Aileen. Come on, Aileen.
You sound, oh, geez, 80s reference. You sounded like a carnival barker there for a moment.
Aileen, 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 Aileen. A childhood was not a dream.
We will not be quitting our day.
We won't be.
Yeah. So we have watched the movie Monster recently, but we have also watched that in the past. At least I have. But most of this is going to be talking about the real story of Aileen Wuornos, or Lee.
Lee.
And I believe Kathy's going to start with a wee bit of her childhood.
Man, I will say that this woman went through some stuff.
Yeah, from Michigan too.
Yeah. Yes. So she, straight out the gate, had a lot of childhood sexual abuse, which I'm not going to go into all of that. It's just relevant to know that
very much so.
Her first experience of being sexually assaulted was as a child, not as a sex worker.
That's important to know, yeah.
It's really important to know because when you look at her story, at least from the film, and I also saw it a while ago and then rewatched it for this episode, is when you watch it, it doesn't give you a lot of that early context.
No.
And it really is just like a snapshot in time. But if you really know about her life, the child sexual abuse clearly set her up. It damaged her, right? How could it not? And we could look at how those traumatic experiences throughout most of her young life could play a part in developing whatever psychological state we decide to put her in. And there are a lot of different opinions around that. Mm-hmm. We know that her biological mother left.
3 months old, by the way, like pre-verbal, never knew her type of deal.
That's right. And her grandmother ignored the sexual abuse that was by her grandfather.
So gaslighting.
Yeah.
We're just adding the things in.
So she didn't have any healthy attachment, right? There was never a mother-daughter or a caretaker-daughter bond as a young girl. So we know that early fragmented, neglectful attachment really doesn't allow someone to develop a healthy sense of love, intimacy, self, all of those things. She learned that it was much safer to just defend herself and to shut all of that away, to not attach. So then the damage was made worse because both Aileen and her brother believed that their grandparents were their biological parents. But at the age of 11, they learned that this was not the case, which further damaged the relationship bond between Wuornos and her adoptive parents. So we know that this also happened to Ted Bundy, that he thought that his mother was his sister and his grandmother was his mother. And his grandfather, who did the majority of the abuse, he thought that was his father. And there's some suspicion that it was, that he actually impregnated his own daughter. So the reason I bring that up is we know that identity, you and I have talked about just the concept of self and someone having a stable sense of who they are is so important for our mental health.
Absolutely.
So as she's developing and she's young and moving into like her teenage years, adolescence, hormones, all this, she finds out that her identity wasn't what she thought.
Right. She
starts to really begin her criminal history begins at the age of 18 when she's arrested for driving under the influence, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. Her crimes didn't start as a sex worker, like I was saying. At the age of 20, she hitchhikes to Florida, marries a 69-year-old yacht club president, Louis Gratzfell. They marry quickly, announce their nuptials, which were printed in the newspaper society pages. Wuornos continually involves herself in confrontations at their local bar, and will just like these assaults will happen, right? She also ends up hitting Fell, her husband, with his own cane, leading him to gain a restraining order against her within weeks of the marriage. She goes back to Michigan, where on July 14, 1976, she's arrested again at Bernie's Club, Antrim County, which has got to be a small town because I know Michigan pretty well, charged with assault and disturbing the peace for throwing a cue ball at a bartender's head. So, she's angry.
Yeah, I want to add one quick thing in there. Wuornos was born in 1956, and in 1963, her father had been in prison, and her father committed suicide in prison, and he was actually in prison for having sodomized a 7-year-old girl. So
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
the father.
You're right. I forgot about that. I also want to mention on the heel of that in 1998, Wuornos also attempted to take her life by shooting herself in the stomach. So between the ages of 14 and 22, she actually attempted suicide 6 times. And then for 10 years, she would continue to be arrested for theft, resisting arrest, possession of a firearm, etc. So, seed was planted early.
Yeah, and the situation, like if we were to have come in contact with her as an older teen, we would have diagnosed her with conduct disorder.
Absolutely.
Which is the precursor to antisocial, just, and like that's a criminal trajectory.
That's right.
Not all of the people we've talked about on the show with regards to their crimes would fit that stereotype, let's say, but she certainly does.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up this theory as we move into this discussion, because I think we can apply it in different ways, and it can coexist with borderline personality, antisocial, but sometimes we like to understand the etiology of things. And there's something called the anomie theory that claims that social inequity and the feeling of injustice can urge people to commit crimes. Violating the law achieves equality. Another way to describe this is normlessness. So anomie theory is a sociological concept that describes a state of normlessness, a disorder or confusion in a society when the standard norms and values are weak or unclear. So a lack of social or ethical standards can lead to disconnection, deviance, and social instability among individuals. The concept was first introduced by French philosopher Jean-Marie Gallet, but it was later expanded by French sociologist Émile Durkheim in his book, The Division of Labor and Society. Before, I just want to say one thing, though, here, and I want to be very mindful of what I just said. The anomie theory can also be used to pathologize folks who are marginalized. So I just want to be careful how I'm suggesting this, because when you read that, it also looks like anybody who was marginalized becomes a criminal or becomes a psychopath. That is not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is when people feel that there won't ever be an opportunity to get justice or to get what they might see other people get, and they are born into a situation where they don't have any deep connection or nurturing or whatever, this can lead to some of these behaviors. So it's not an all or nothing philosophy, and it's just a theory. Our environment growing up plays a big part in who we become. So, and the things that are done to us and what we have accessible to us. And not everybody has the same resources. So.
Yeah, and I think you make an important point that this is a sociological theory.
That's right.
And not fact and all of that.
It's just another thing to kind of think about how just her environment alone really set her up for failure.
Well, and I think we address that all the time in these situations, but we also have stated on numerous occasions that there are a lot of people that grow up in these kinds of different situations, horrific to from the outside, and don't do any of these things.
That's right.
So that's why it's just a theory.
Yep.
People are, it's a psychologist, sociologist, the world, the law, everybody trying to make sense of it.
Jean-Marie Gallet.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought you were going to say now why I pronounce it that way is, no, that's not what you were going to say.
No.
So
Aileen.
Yeah.
Aileen.
You're just going to keep singing that song.
Shannon.
You want to move into the murders? Is that where we're going?
Well, of course we're going to move into those murders.
Okay, because that's all I got.
Well, I'll say one more thing. In 1986 is where she meets 24-year-old Tyria Moore, a motel maid. That is actually the person who Christina Ricci's character is loosely based off of, I think.
Ty.
They met at a Daytona Beach gay bar called Zodiac. They move in together, and if you've seen the movie, this was portrayed in the movie by the character of Selby, who lived at home with her parents.
Well, and it's really interesting because 1986, that's the same year that Wuornos was charged with theft and arrest and obstruction of justice and all this other stuff.
Goddamn mess.
And Lee, meaning Aileen, and Ty, they met obviously at this bar, and a gay bar, and which was true of like that representation in the movie is true. But Wuornos was only 6 years older.
Yeah, it wasn't this huge age
It wasn't
gap.
this like she absconded with a teenager type
No.
of situation, which is what they do in the movie.
No. They cheapened it for your viewing pleasure.
Yeah, they made it more dramatic.
They did.
They added a whole B story around how Ty was like more of a helpless person being manipulated, which is interesting because I don't know that that would have been in any way accurate at all.
That's true, because she was very young and she just wanted out of her house, and that wasn't who this person was.
Well, yeah, this person was 24, and
A motel maid.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what her...
She was a motel maid.
I heard you.
Okay.
So Wuornos was murdered 7 men within a 12-month period.
That is like a fucking... She just went to town.
Yeah. And as we have stated, she had always been involved in criminal behavior, and she had been a prostitute for quite some time since she was young. And all the men that she murdered were older. They were like between 40 and 65 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They were all people soliciting her for services, is my understanding. And they were all motorists. You know, she'd get into cars.
I mean, who wouldn't?
Right.
I mean, these guys looked nice.
So the first one that we know of is Richard Charles Mallory, who was 51. And this is the one I believe that she accused of sadistically, anally raping her.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this description. You can watch the court representation of this, where he then put rubbing alcohol into orifices, her anus, her nose. He was going to put it in her mouth. He was sadistically going to kill her. And she felt, this is her story, she felt as if he was going to kill her. And from the way she portrays it, and what we know about risk behavior and the way he was talking to her and what he was doing, even though he was promising that if she did this, this, and this, he wasn't going to, you could tell that he was going to. And that rape was, her story is that then she was trying to save her own life and she had a gun in her purse, and so she killed him.
I mean, it makes sense.
It's a powerful story, and that story is represented in the movie.
Yeah.
Very effectively.
Well, and we know...
And uncomfortably.
We know that anyone, not anyone, but many women in her position may not have had the self-defense that she had learned for years from doing the stuff she did. That, to me, it's certainly plausible.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any reason not to believe her, really, except that I don't know her, trust her,
right?
Understand her psychology at all. But this is the story that she told, and I'm guessing that there was some proof to that, but I don't know. So then there was David Andrew Spears, who's age 47. He was a construction worker, and he was just declared missing, and his naked body was found. You know, he'd been shot 6 times. So the way they portray it in the movie is as a trauma response. She's a sexually abused youth. She had been hooking for a really long time in her young life, and then all of a sudden she starts killing for 12 months before she confesses and all of that. So it reads like this experience with Richard, her first victim, it reads like she had a trauma response and it tripped something inside of her that she was capable of. Not everybody would have that reaction. And then went about killing all of her Johns for 12 months, not all of them, because she only killed 7 men. So I'm assuming she slept with and did her job for those 12 months and didn't kill everyone. But the way it's portrayed, where, shooting someone a bazillion times when you don't really need to, doesn't feel, it's premeditated, but it's not meditated, it's like,
it's very passionate.
It's very passionate. And it feels like, it's kind of like any serial killer where if we talk about Bundy, if we talk about whoever, before that ultimate ending escalation that gets them all caught and disorganized, there is usually some reasoning, some excuse they're giving themselves for killing that particular person. And that's really portrayed in the movie.
Yep.
They give a lot of empathy to her. Charlize portrays her very empathetically, which I think is very powerful. But they do show you that she picks and chooses who she kills, and it's like this little test that's happening in the interaction. And if one little thing is said wrong or said the way, and she misperceives it, or she perceives it in a certain way, then she's going to shoot you 100 times.
Yeah.
And that is the same as the way we understand many of the serial killers that we've talked about that are men, where they could go on dates or marry or have friendships with women that they don't do anything bad to, but then there'll be the one woman that says this thing or that thing or reminds them of their mommy or whatever, and that person becomes a victim. So it's very similar to me.
No, it is. And or the other one, the ones that aren't killed serve a different kind of purpose, like a purpose that actually is like a positive supply for them, so they don't want to do anything to get rid of them.
Right, and those are represented in the movie too. And those people really existed. There's several people in documentaries about Aileen that have been interviewed that are where the men in the movie were kind of drawn from as men that she was friends with. And
because it's Bruce Jenner's character, right, in the movie, that they have a relationship. They have a very father-daughter like relationship, it seems, anyway. Yeah,
and there's a couple of other men in her life that were similar in the sense that she was either getting something from them where they were helping her out, or she would stay with them sometimes, or money or jobs or whatever, and you're not sure of the authenticity of the relationships. And then there
was no need for murder.
All right, we have natural instincts to find caregivers in our lives that care for us. And so when we come across people that do that, we want that.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of our parents' sicknesses. And
that's right.
And she had parents that had some pretty horrible sicknesses, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But so then there was Charles, who was 40. He was a part-time rodeo worker, and shot 9 times. So you see
there's a trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She would steal their cars. Next was Peter. His body was never found. Not sure how many times he was shot or what happened there. Troy, who was some sort of salesman, he was reported missing. His body was found in a wooded area. He'd been shot only twice. Then there was Charles, a U.S. Air Force major, and a former state child abuse investigator, and a former chief of police. His body was found in Marion County. He was fully clothed and had been shot 7 times in the head and torso. And then his car was found somewhere else. As represented in the movie, she would kill them and then take the car and the money and everything and
sometimes the clothing.
Yeah, and the clothing, and try to survive that way and get away with it. And in the movie, it's portrayed where this retired chief of police was really, she fucked up. She killed a retired police officer, and then everybody got really interested in it. And then her and Ty's photos ended up, police sketches. She had run a car into a house or something like that, and then there was a witness.
Yeah, and I think the way they play it in the film is that the police clearly abusing his power and all that was just really, you're fucking whore and this and this and that.
Yeah,
and law enforcement never protected her as a child too. Law enforcement was probably the ultimate evil to her.
I imagine. The 7th victim was Walter, and he was shot 4 times, and the car was left, and his nearly naked body. So you get the idea of any list of victims that we've ever recounted on the show have similarities and in the way they were killed, and that is the way it went for Lee or Aileen.
Aileen.
Mm-hmm. You want to sing it again?
No. I'd like to keep our listeners. I'd like to just talk a little bit about her mental health.
Sure, you bet.
And I think that this is complicated, like all clients. I mean, like all folks are. We're all complicated. But, to me, there's a clear borderline organization happening here.
Okay.
With her. whether has borderline or had borderline personality disorder, I don't know. But, you know, we're looking at someone who clearly responded to she was very triggered by rejection, abandonment, all of these things. She attached really quickly. You know, when we think about that marriage to the 69-year-old man and how fast that went, she's just very all or nothing. Had a very fragile or fragmented sense of who she was, and her reactions and her responses to things. Just, to me, if we're looking at just cluster B, antisocial personality, borderline personality, narcissistic personality, there's other stuff in there, but to me, borderline screams the loudest to me. I don't know if you agree or disagree with
just
that.
Just also based on her childhood.
And based on her childhood.
Mother, father, abandoning emotionally, obviously, and physically.
Mm-hmm.
Grandparents, then, you know, this ruse of where you're actually your parents never really goes over that well, but people do it all the time. And then telling her that at 11, such an impressionable time. So I imagine she felt betrayed, abandoned in that way, emotionally at least.
Yeah.
And then goes about her life and becomes a hooker very early on. So maybe in search of something, but also in search of survival. I mean, most people who are doing that as a living are simply trying to make a living.
For sure. Would you consider her a psychopath?
It's hard to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's got sociopathic tendencies. I think she's highly manipulative.
Yeah, I do too. To me, it feels more like that.
It feels like a sociopathic narcissism, but maybe even just a narcissistic defense. It's like so well developed and so used constantly that, and then everything's operating at a borderline functioning level. So it's all chaos, all
the time,
mm-hmm. And everything has to be heightened. It's either you're the worst person in the world and you deserve to die, and so I'm going to shoot you 12 times, or I love you so much we have to run away together and I'll take care of you. And like that love bombing, I can imagine her gaslighting and love bombing and all of that with her primary people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that narcissism comes in. I really feel like the sociopathic narcissism and the borderline functioning, all of that would make it so that she was incredibly compelling if you were a vulnerable person.
Mm-hmm.
So that reads like a lot of the serial killers we talk about.
Yeah.
But not from a psychopathic.
No, I don't think she was a psychopath.
I think she has guilt. I think she has remorse.
Mm-hmm.
I think she understands what she did. I think she doesn't feel like she's more special than anyone else.
No.
So.
No. I agree with all that. But yeah, we can definitely talk about her arrest. I mean, in the movie, the mm-hmm. scene that you were talking about where they mm-hmm. crashed that car, that sort of begins the search, right?
Mm-hmm.
Christina Ricci's character's driving the car. They're in some argument or whatever, and the car gets totaled, and the house, the neighbors, whatever, they're like, should we call the police for you? Should we call, emergency? They're like, no. So they walk away. And then the police end up getting a description from these folks. And this leads to this massive campaign for a search.
Yeah, and they also found some of the belongings in the pawn shops, and then she was arrested in a bar under the ruse, just like in the movie, under the ruse that they were luring out her outside and everything, and then she was arrested and ultimately went to trial for the murder of the first victim, who was the one who anally raped her and was a sadist, and that whole story that she told. And for whatever reason, the judge allowed the admission of information about like the 6 other murders. And so that's really what sealed the conviction, because I think if they had not allowed the information from the 6 other murders, there was a very strong case around self-defense and
against Mallory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And all of that. And so.
Yeah. Cause Mallory was the first victim. And that was the one that I guess he had previous rape charges. Right. So that mm-hmm. would have been like, there's your smoking gun. She was assaulted. She killed in self-defense.
Yeah, and
End
there
of
were
scene.
absolutely, and there were psychiatrists that testified that she was mentally unstable, diagnosed her with BPD, diagnosed her with antisocial, all of that. And then, but then whatever, she was sentenced to death, basically.
Yeah.
She was sentenced to execution and then was executed.
And the movie portrays this. I'm not sure how accurate it was, and maybe because I think you said you watched some of the docs and stuff on where Ty's character, who's Selby in the movie, has to testify in court, and that whole scene was done very well in the film, and it was very emotional. You actually feel bad for her. I did in that moment where Selby has to turn against her.
Christina Ricci was so good.
She's so good, and then just the helplessness, the hopelessness that it starts to hit her like that. She's coming out of that spiral, that chaos, and it's starting to hit her like, oh no, this is happening.
We come out of the fog.
We've come out of the fog, and I'm done.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. I have no idea what happened in real life, but it was heartbreaking, and I do know that Ty did testify against her, so part of that is obviously true. I don't know what Ty's reactions or mental state was like at the time, but yeah, I watched that filmmaker Nick Broomfield, who did a lot of grittier documentaries for a while there. I actually don't know what he's doing now. I should look that up. It was a very interesting documentary because it went all into this woman that while Lee was in prison, that this woman that adopted her and her lawyer. There's all these stories around who she began to get involved with while she was in prison, and this woman, this Christian woman adopting her and then taking money for interviews. Like, it goes on and on. The stories just go on and on. And even though originally Aileen had said that every single person she killed either raped her or attempted to rape her, later she recanted that, saying that it was actually robbery, self-preservation, and needing to leave no witnesses behind, this kind of thing. So, but because she picked and chose victims, it just speaks to there was something about that particular person that she wanted to annihilate, but I'm just not sure. So I would never want to portray her as just a victim. She is absolutely a victim.
Yeah, and a perpetrator.
Or as so many of the folks that we talk about are.
That's right.
And also not an accurate historian. You cannot believe her. So that's why it's hard to come up with, oh, I believe this, or I believe that about it, is I don't believe any of it.
It's true.
I don't believe any of it.
Yeah.
So I just have to come at it from like, this is what's been reported.
All of it's feasible.
Yeah.
Right?
It's all feasible. It all tracks. But,
you don't know. And you don't even know how much of it because she was such a pathological liar, how much of it she actually believed was the truth. So we go back to thinking, like, we had that discussion around psychopath versus sociopath and narcissism, borderline, all this stuff. Like, when I'm looking at her, she was in such the throes of like just needing to survive, right? She wasn't a sexual sadist. She wasn't keeping things from her victims as trophies. She was keeping things from her victims to sell so she could continue to live. Yeah. These are very different motivations than we've seen than in some of these other serial killers that we've talked about, right? Just, she was very much just trying to fucking survive.
Yeah, and it's very confusing because once she was on death row, there's a lot of stuff that she said to cameras, that she said in interviews, that she reports happening in prison, where a lot of paranoia, that like her food and things, she would taint the food, they would taint the food, they're trying to push me over the edge, so I'll kill myself, this kind of stuff. And also, she's taken interviews and said things like, I'd kill again. They're not going to keep me alive because they know I'd kill again. And I killed those men cold as ice, I think was the quote. And I do it again. Like, she said a lot of that stuff. So it's all very personality driven.
It is.
It's all.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why. And then she'd come up with these wild stories about how she was going to sell her story and make a lot of money and get out of jail. And then she ended up being adopted by this woman in the neighborhood. Like, it goes on and on. The stories are amazing.
Can you imagine, though, the amount of fantasy that she had to create to not go crazy? And what I'm referring to is children will do this if they've been in really abusive situations, is they have to create an alternate reality. And so her lying was really a defense against the truth. And from early on, she had to create her own. And again, this is just an explanation. It by no means is an excuse, but what she had to do, to survive.
And then it went in this direction, which of course not all trauma survivors.
That's right.
Go in these directions.
So
that's what we got.
And Charlize and Christina Ricci.
Yeah, the movie.
So brilliant.
Yeah, the movie's really good. I think Charlize was nominated or won the Oscar or something like that.
I think she might have won. I can look that up right now.
At the time, here's what I can tell you. Now looking at it, you can think whatever. But at the time, Charlize was one of the most beautiful movie stars ever. And this movie where she plays this woman and completely distorts herself physically on her face, her hair, the way, she gained weight, all of this stuff. It was an amazing transformation at the time. Now we've seen Charlize do a lot of different roles. She's a woman of a certain age now, so she can do a lot of different kinds of things. But at the time, she was like a young movie star who's like more gorgeous than 99% of the population. And then she did this role and really established herself as an actor and not just a movie star. And it was pretty revolutionary.
She transformed.
I'll tell you, at the time.
She transformed, and not just visually.
No.
Because anyone can put makeup on, and you can make a really pretty person look ugly, or look beat down, or look torn up, like Aileen Wuornos was. She did end up winning the Best Actress award for this, and it's so well deserved. But it was so much more than her physical transformation. She brought the body language, the emotion, the cadence in her speech. Like, you put them next to each other and it's uncanny.
Yeah, she established herself as a very, very competent actor at the time. And to make the choice is more what I was speaking to, like to be the young starlet who's gorgeous and to make the choice to take this role over the slop I'm sure she was offered to be the beautiful person in was like inspiring and very much I felt like it changed my mind about who I thought she was. And I thought that was really cool. Yeah. So, but anyway, I recommend the movie. Not an easy watch,
no,
but an interesting watch.
Not the feel-good movie of the year.
No. It's very.
God, I can't believe that was 2004.
Yeah, a long time ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, everyone. This has been an episode of Terror Talk. We hope you enjoyed it. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.